So this is the Afterburn. Hopefully this is starting to unravel Paul a little bit for everybody. Now some people, if I just said certain things and claimed certain things, would say that I'm cherry picking or this or that or trying to spin things. Not if you read far enough along and let Paul explain himself. The reason we started in chapter 1 is that this started out as a problem between Jew and Gentile based on their birth and their lineages, and continues all the way to the end of chapter 3 to be about whether or not you're a Jew or a Gentile. It has nothing to do with the law. As a matter of fact, he said very clearly, let it not be. He says, are we doing away with? Are we nullifying the Torah? Let it not be. So we're not nullifying the Torah. How do Christians say that Paul teaches us that the Torah is done away with when he absolutely says we're not nullifying the Torah? Adamantly, let it not be. He says we establish it. Because if you say don't commit adultery and then you commit it, you're not establishing anything. If you're saying don't steal and then you steal, you're not establishing anything. If you say we're supposed to keep the Sabbath and you don't keep the Sabbath and you work, you're not establishing anything. Is that making sense? Are we getting clear with this? All right, so if you have a comment or question, you can raise your hand. Owen's gonna come around with the mic. And if you're on live stream, Rob Wyatt's got it. And let's try to keep it on today's teaching, which is on the book of Romans. We did cover a lot in 70 minutes. So, okay, who's first? Okay, Wayne.
Wow, what amazing teaching that was today. Just going over this really brought me back to when it talks about those that endure will receive the crown of life. And then that took me to Revelations 14, verse 12, which says, here is the endurance of the set apart ones, which is the covenant. Here are those guarding the commands of Elohim and the belief of Yeshua Messiah.
Amen.
So it tells us right there that you have to have your works with your belief to endure, to receive.
Amen. Sounds like a good name for a teaching. Endure and receive the crown of life. That might be a good teaching. Oh, wait a minute, we already have one like that. All right, who's next? All right, Michelle.
I know that you're implying about how much of the Torah you actually keep, that you failed to keep, and what is covered by grace. Where does willful sin fall in? Like if you willfully sin against the Torah, like you break it willfully, like you consciously know it, versus, oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that. Nobody told me. You know what I mean?
Yep. Okay. So, two things. One is, I know you're brand new, so you're probably going to want to go back and listen to a teaching called The Search for the Doctrine of Grace, which will help you understand where grace fits into this. But the idea of willful sin, it's a really good question, actually. I appreciate the question, because every sin, just about, once you understand the law and everything that you do sin is still willful. You do it because you want to. So when he talks about willful sin, we're talking about that which you do with absolutely no intention ever of repenting of it, and that rebellious stubbornness, etc. I mean, when you are knowing that you should not do something, but you still do it anyway, it's because you haven't dealt with the law of sin and death that roars in your members and your desires of the flesh. And so you still do all the things you do because you want to. Maybe not up here, but there's still an emotional, fleshly drive to do it. Okay? So be careful with that whole trying to figure out, is there an unpardonable sin or how that all works. As long as you keep getting to repentance and don't get Catholic on me and decide I'm going to do it knowing I'm going to repent later. Okay, that kind of, well, I'm just going to do this and do a few, whatever, Hail Marys and Our Fathers and whatever. Okay, that's the wrong thought process. The thing is, when he convicts you and you feel the guilt, then you're still okay. Meaning, as long as you can still feel guilty, which means you can get to your knees and cry it out and apologize and feel bad, you're probably going to be okay. When you no longer feel guilty or any thought to repent, now you're in trouble. Now we're in that willful, from a different point of view. Willful meaning that I do it not caring about the consequences, not caring about what Yahweh said. But realize that almost all sin, once you know the law, once you understand the Torah, is still willful. You didn't do it by accident. You didn't accidentally commit adultery. You didn't accidentally steal something. You didn't accidentally murder somebody. You didn't accidentally bear a false witness. You did it because you wanted to. And so the whole point is, though, if the capacity is still there for him to stir up in you the guilt, the recognition that you're wrong, then there's still hope and a time for you to repent and make it right. Does that make sense? It's when you are now become hardened in your heart and callous, and the ability to feel guilt and wrong is gone, that you're probably in big trouble. Does that answer your question? Okay. Well, the grace part, you're going to have to listen to the teaching. Okay, because if I try to explain that, that'll get too confusing. Okay? Can I what? Yeah, we'll give you the CDs at the after services. Only because grace, from where you're coming from, if you don't understand the teaching, is completely different than the way we understand it now. Okay, so, because grace has nothing to do with that. And so that's the whole point, is that grace has been mistaught for almost 2,000 years. And so listen to the CD first and then ask the question if you still have confusion about it. I want to answer your question, but it's 14 CDs to explain one little thing. And so it's going to take a while for you to get that. I'm not being disrespectful, hopefully, so you understand. I'm trying to be actually very respectful, so that rather than give you a soundbite that won't make any sense, go listen to the teaching so that it'll make sense. We'll give you the CDs. Okay, who's next? Okay, Rabbi Tom?
Thank you, Rabbi. I was wondering, how can we reconcile Romans 2:12 with 1 John 3:4?
Okay, let's go back to 2:12. Okay, so for as many as sinned without the Torah shall also perish without the Torah, and as many sinned in the Torah shall be judged by the Torah. Okay, and 1 John 3 says everyone doing sin also does lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. Okay? There's not a problem. Remember, he's still trying to use the way he's wording this, and you know, it's very frustrating because Paul uses his own very weird, unique way of terming things. And I'm not saying that to be, you know, mocking or anything. It's just very strange sometimes the way, instead of coming right out and saying what he wants to say, he uses metaphors and he uses ways of alluding to things. And he's trying to say, look, for as many as sinned who are not born into covenant, they're also going to perish without being born into covenant, you know? And as many that had sinned who were in covenant, they're going to be judged according to the covenant, because the covenant, you can't be judged according to something you weren't part of. It's not really kind of defining sin or not here. Okay, he's defining relationships. Okay, so everything Paul's trying to do in Romans is trying to define relationships. The relationship between a person born Israelite, and he's really referring to the Jews here because the Israelites have been scattered. So let's just use the terms he uses. A person who's born Jewish and by birth in covenant and obligated to covenant, and comparing that to the person who was born non-Jewish or Gentile and not born obligated to covenant, and the choices they make when they become aware of covenant. The Jew who decides to keep or not keep and how that should be affecting them, and the same thing with the Gentile who decides to keep or not keep. And the way he says it is like a Jew who chooses not to might as well be a Gentile. And a Gentile who chooses to will be looked at as if he's a Jew, as if he's covenanted. Because it's by choice, not by birth, that all this matters. Okay, he's trying to derail this whole, you know, call it like a racism thing. Okay? The Jew versus the rest of the world. This righteous, self-righteous nonsense. I'm better than you because I'm born into this. This still exists, by the way. You go to a Messianic Jewish congregation that has a lot of Jews in it, or even if it doesn't, they're going to teach from a Messianic Jewish point of view that it's of the Jews first and all the rest of you can just get second place. And it astounded me when I went to one for a couple of months that nobody seemed to mind except me, and nobody seemed to be offended but me at the way this guy was teaching from the podium. I mean, as a Gentile who's now in there, who was never born Jewish, I can't believe they're okay being second-class citizens in that system. I'm not talking about the whole Messianic. I'm talking about the ones that are from the Messianic Jewish main groups, the MJAA, UMJC groups. There's no doubt when you go there that they teach a class system. There's the Jews, and then everybody else. And Paul is arguing against that in Romans right here. This is not a new problem. This is a problem in Rome 2,000 years ago, where the Jews are trying to start and think, well, and of course the Gentiles are getting their own haughty little thing going on because they're thinking, well, you guys blew it, it's our turn. They're getting this whole replacement theology thing going on. So Paul's trying to deal with the Jews' haughtiness about their bloodline and the Gentiles getting into this replacement theology deal. And he's trying to attack both of those issues, and all he's doing is confusing the snot out of all of us. Sorry, that's a rabbinic term. Okay. So, but that's what's happening. But really what he's trying to do is those two simple things. He's telling the Jews, knock it off. There's no big deal. Yes, there's an advantage to the fact you were born that way. It was an advantage, meaning that you should have had it without having to be introduced to it. But you can also blow the advantage that you have. All right? I set you up in a race, and I put you 100 feet in front of me. You have an advantage. You're already 100 feet down the racetrack. Well, the gun goes off and you don't move. And I catch up to you. Was that advantage, did it do anything for you? No. That's all Paul's saying. The Jews were born with an advantage in his day. They were born into a society that should have known about the covenant. Should have been taught it from birth. But the advantage is not an advantage if you don't take advantage of it. Because if you just sit there standing there watching me run towards you and then run right past you, then that advantage is now lost. But now, as a Gentile running past you, the Gentile can't look back and go, well, he blew it. No, he's just got to wake up and start running again too, because everybody that finishes still wins. I don't mean like in a societal way where there's no winners and losers. Finishing the race still gets you there, whether you get there slow or you get there fast. The point is, don't quit, and that's the whole endure and receive the crown of life teaching. Keep running the race. But if you can't understand, that's why we spent almost 30 minutes at the beginning of this, what the real issue is. And I might get it all messed up a little bit as I'm trying to read his words and keep remembering how to reword it into the context of the problem. The problem is never the law itself. It's each group's relationship to it. Hopefully we make sense with that. The problem is not the law itself, but the relationship people have with it, or the one they think they have with it, and understanding how that either elevates them or not. Because remember, we're all heading towards the tree grafting in issue in Romans 11. He's laying this all out to get us to chapter 11. Of course, there's even more chapters after that, but do you understand what I'm saying here? Okay, Marty.
I apologize in advance if you covered this, but I wasn't following closely enough. But there seems to be, looks like what could be a contradiction between chapters 2 and 3. I know there's not, but I just wanted to hear what you had to say about chapter 2 and verse 13 and chapter 3 and verse 20.
Chapter 3 and verse 20.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, see, by the time we get to chapter 20, chapter 3 and verse 20, he's still really dealing with the verse 1 of chapter 3. He's still talking about circumcision, okay? So this particular work of the law is what he's talking about. He said, you're not declared right just because you got circumcised. And so that doesn't conflict at all with what's going on in chapter 2, because chapter 2 is saying not the hearers of the law, but the doers are going to be declared right. Here he's talking about the whole law. All of a sudden now he's really getting more into this whole, at the end of chapter 2, the circumcised versus the uncircumcised. In chapter 3, verse 1, he says, what advantage does the Jew have and what value is the circumcision? He says, well, much in every way, etc. But then he goes, but just because you were circumcised, it doesn't declare you right. And so it could be very simply, he's pointing to a very specific thing that he's been talking about now for about 20 verses. This whole idea of circumcision, because by the way, this is a huge problem and even Acts 15 deals with this. It's a huge problem in the Jewish community dealing with the Gentiles. The idea that they need to get circumcised before they could do anything. And so they're thinking, I'm perfectly fine standing on this one law that I'm circumcised, so I'm declared right just by that. And he keeps saying, no, but you act like a Gentile, then your circumcision is worthless. So at this point, since the end of chapter 2, getting into 3, it's all about the circumcision. As an idea of saying, this makes me somebody special because I'm circumcised on the 8th day. He says, no, it's not that. He says, therefore by the works of Torah no flesh shall be declared right before him, or by the Torah, because for by the Torah is the knowledge of sin. But now, apart from the Torah, he does such convoluted ways of explaining himself. He's trying to get us to the point that it's not about the Jew, verse 29, it's about the Gentiles also, and yet we're not nullifying the Torah. But you can't use aspects of the Torah to say somehow we're right, and that's a permanent we're right, just because by lineage. And there's a problem with that, okay? For these people, they're having a real problem embracing that I'm not just in because I'm Jewish. You got to do something, okay? And the Gentiles are not just in because they get and believe in Yeshua. They've got to do something. And so hopefully, does that answer the question? Does that make some sense? Okay? And I think that the way he writes it and then the way people have translated it over the years, sometimes we can get lost on if he's specifically talking about a specific issue of Torah, which I believe here is the circumcision, okay? Or if it's some other thing. But really, the whole issue in the context of flowing it through, it still goes to the end of the chapter talking about, it is one Elohim declared right, the circumcised by belief and the uncircumcised through belief. Stop focusing just on the circumcision, is what he's saying. And I think their problem has been this all along. So when he says, therefore by this work of the law, the work of Torah called circumcision, you're not declared right just by that. It's not enough. Now, of course, he doesn't come out and just say that. So we're stuck to try to make the pieces all together, which is why context is so important. You have to read enough of it to know what he's been talking about. Remember what I've said a long time ago. If someone is talking about A, and then there's a bunch of stuff you maybe don't understand, and then it continues into talking about A, that means whatever was in the middle still was about A. You just have to figure out how it connects. He's been talking about circumcision versus uncircumcision, a Jew versus a Gentile by birth. And at the end of it, he's talking about a Jew versus a Gentile, a circumcision versus uncircumcision by birth. Everything in between is still talking about that problem. Does that help? Okay? But if you don't understand that, you'll never understand Paul, because Paul needs an awful lot to understand one thing he's saying. And that's where Christianity gets so derailed into confusion, is because they look at one little verse and have no idea why he was saying it. They have no idea what it's connected to or what the context is, because they won't go to the rest of it. I'm telling you, I started off looking up every verse where the word covenant was in, okay? From Genesis to Revelation. And then I looked at each verse to see what the context of the word covenant was, and if it was talking about the idea of covenant between men or between Elohim and us. And I went to go through the sections. And then when I did, in case you ever want to know how to write a teaching, I had to go look at the context. So when I got to Romans, the verse is Romans 9:4. That first came up with the word for covenant. Now, we did read the word covenant in one of the other verses, but it must have been a slightly different Greek word, so it didn't come up in my search. But in Romans 9:4, and then Romans 11:27 are the two places that the word covenant came up in my search. And then trying to figure out where to explain those two verses, I went all the way back to chapter 8. And then I looked at it last night and realized, no, I need to go back to chapter 7, no 6, no 5, no 4, 3. Next thing you know, I'm in verse 1 of chapter 1. And actually, I didn't get to that until I was doing it while you guys were singing and dancing. The Ruach hit me with something. I went up here, I grabbed my scriptures and my notes, and I went back there while you were singing and dancing. And I wrote down all this stuff going all the way back to Romans chapter 1. Last night, I was only planning to go back to chapter 8 and maybe going back to, 3 maybe, okay? I don't know where it was. No, I think I just gave in to just going to stay in chapter 8. But then I realized, no, there's no way to understand Paul just doing that. You have to know what he's talking about in general. What is the point? He didn't write a letter because he just felt like writing a letter. Hey, guys, haven't talked to you in a long time. Let me tell you a few things. Okay? He's addressing something. He's got something to say. And the something is the same something that had him go to Jerusalem in Acts 15. The same problem that was going on there, which is the Jews and the Gentiles having issues with each other. The Jews especially saying, I'm sorry, this is ours, you can't have it. And if you want to have it, then go get snipped. And the Gentile going, snipped? Wow, that seems like a lot just to find out what you guys are into. I just want to know what you're doing. It sounds pretty good, and I might want to get into it. And James had to say, that's fine. Let them come and hear Moses preached every Sabbath in the synagogues, and then they will then eventually make a decision to covenant and get snipped. It was never a decision against circumcision. It was a decision against the timing of it. The Jews are like, no, they can't walk into our synagogues uncircumcised. That's no good. I want to know who was at the door checking. Eesh. But you understand what I'm saying? The issue was, I know how we can get rid of those Gentiles. Let's tell them they got to get circumcised first. They'll never come. The Jews did not want them there. Do you understand that? Like any other ism, racism, this ism, that ism, okay? If you're in a black community, you don't want the whites. If you're a white community, you don't want the blacks. If you're in an American thing, then you don't want the other culture. If you want this culture, you don't want that culture. If you're Serbian, you don't want Croatian. If you want, pick whatever it is. Whatever the isms can be. It could be by color. It could be by belief system. It could be by, religious system. If you look at the other people as somehow less than or evil or whatever it is, or what, somehow, then you're going to try to figure out a way to keep them out of your group. Does it make sense? No, it doesn't. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that people do that. I'm teasing you. I knew that I wanted you to say yes. Okay. And so this is the problem. The Jews are doing the same thing, and then the Gentiles did the same thing later, because they called it Judaizing to keep the Torah. So nobody's guilt-free from this, and Paul's trying to say that here. He says, my Jewish brothers got cut off for this nonsense, and if you guys don't knock it off, you're going to get cut off too. We got to stop looking at each other through all of those filters. You are a human being, so am I. Let's start there. Now, you might have a different color, a different shape, a different gender, a different height, a different weight. Who cares? All of us think a little different. We all believe a little different. We're all trying to hopefully get to the same place. And we have to figure out how we can do that together safely. Does that make sense? And get away from this whole looking down at and judging and everything else. And that's what Paul's trying to deal with in Rome. Of course, the simplest basic problem here is the Jew versus the Gentile. Now, we have a hard time relating to that because you don't see that in our congregations. But if you were to go back then to see how huge this was, which led to the early church fathers, the heroes of Christianity, basically putting the Jews as a target for everything. They felt threatened by the natural branches. So they wanted to help cut them off, literally. And then they thought burning them would be good too. After all their branches, let's burn them. This is the problem. Jealousies, all that fleshly stuff. We have better be paying attention that we don't ever get into that. Okay? We had better not get into that. We have had people in our group leave because they could not stand among their quote-unquote community because the leader of this group is white. And I said, sounds to me like it was an opportunity to teach the people that your community need to learn about their racism. What difference does it make what color the leader of this group is? It just happens to be that I'm the leader. So I happen to be white and Jewish. So what? Hopefully I've never made you feel less because you're not white and Jewish. And if you're white, maybe you're not Jewish, whatever it is. Nobody should make anybody feel less because they're not something. Remember, I've taught this over and over again. It's by choice that you're Israel. Make choices, and you are pleasing in his sight. It doesn't matter what you look like, where you were born, and all that other garbage. I'm so sick of all that prejudicial garbage. All right, where's the mic? Okay, Kirk?
Just real quick, want to mention, I see a parallel with, you're talking about the circumcision, getting them in. Modern day Christianity says if we claim the name or just believe in, Jesus, then I see the same parallel there. Some sort of simple action like that, or it's so shallow, it has no meaning to it. I don't know if that works.
Well, I mean, to some degree, look, I mean, there are those in mainstream Christianity that are viciously angry and attacking those of you that would dare to come under the law, so to speak, that would dare to choose to be Torah observant. How many of you felt that attack? Okay, you felt that attack. This is still going on to a certain degree. Okay, when you look at it from that point of view, it's not about literal bloodlines at this point, it's about choices. They choose to believe in a Messiah that doesn't require them to keep anything, and you choose to embrace the Messiah that gave the law. And so this creates a rift. The thing is that hopefully you're not throwing anything at them. I know I talk hard against the system. I want you to say, I don't want you to do anything to the people. Don't mock them on Facebook. Don't pick on them right before Christmas and Easter like a lot of you do and blah, blah, blah. Okay? They are there, just like you were, waiting for him to open their eyes and ears. Not their fault. I only give all the grief I can to the system that is lying to them. Okay? Okay, Rebbitzin.
Okay, I hope I can say this without getting too emotional, because covenant is really important to me my whole life. I was blessed to grow up in a home. Sorry, it's just this talk of covenant brought up the fact that you mentioned that a lot of Jews and Messianic Jews don't honor the non-Jews that come in, and my whole life I just wanted to be in covenant. And when we visited several Messianic congregations and you said that they didn't really honor those who weren't of Jewish bloodline, I remember you feeling offended for me. And at the time I thought I just wanted to be at the master's feet and take the crumbs. And that's why I put up with it. But I really appreciate you because you are Jewish and you've never made anybody feel like they were second class or that they had to be different from what they were, and emphasize it over and over that it's just about being Israel. And so if you want to be in covenant and do Torah, it doesn't matter what you are. And I really appreciate that, because I can imagine what Paul was dealing with. Here are all these Gentiles who might be super excited, and the Jews are picking on them. And all they want to do is learn it. And Paul's having to deflect this and just make them understand that it's just about being together and, being in covenant. So I hope this helps.
Amen. I appreciate that. And that's something that I try to do in the teachings, especially like in Discovering Your Identity, is like you should not be just sitting there happy to grab crumbs. You are to be an equal citizen. You are to be, just as much as anyone who was born in. There's no difference. Paul says there's no longer Greek nor Jew, okay, but only Israel. And this is, scripturally all the way through. And this is important that people, can embrace this. But, sometimes it's hard when you're in the middle of it to have the discernment. And my wife had struggled to see that, and she heard me she was like, why are you upset about this? And I had to explain. I said, I was upset not just because it was happening. I was even more upset that nobody seemed to be upset by it. I mean, I literally, as the guy's saying certain things, I'm looking around the room and she's like, what? I'm like, I just don't notice anybody being bothered by what that guy just said. And there was some very openly clear second-class citizen language being said from the microphone. And nobody seemed to care. But let's just remember in Paul's writings here in Romans, this is where we get confused, because sometimes he's picking on the Jewish side of the problem. Sometimes he's picking on the Gentile side of the problem, because both groups are having the same problem, just from a slightly different perspective. But the problem is still a hypocrisy, a haughtiness, an ego pride problem, that somehow we're right, they're wrong. They're both doing it. It's just coming from a slightly different root, if you understand what I'm saying. They're using different things to justify their position. The Jew from his birth, the Gentile from his belief in Messiah, without all the other stuff. And it ends up in the same mess. And he's trying to warn them, you're both in the same mess. Don't do this. Where's the mic? Okay, Owen. Okay, Christina.
So I believe this teaching ties back to something in the Torah portion this week. And I know that Rabbi will correct me if I'm wrong, but it says Numbers 15 through 16. One law is for you of the assembly and for the stranger who sojourns with you, a law forever throughout your generations. As you are, so is the stranger before Yahweh. One Torah and one right ruling is for you and for the stranger who sojourns with you. When I first got involved in Messianic Judaism, and Yahweh called me out of the Christian church and into the path that we're on right now, I actually ended up going to a Messianic congregation that they did believe they were part of the MJAA. And they did believe in the Jews versus the Gentiles. And they used the scripture that you were teaching on, that it goes to the Jew and then the Gentile. And that it's okay to be separate but equal. And that just blew my mind. I completely did not understand that at all. Because to me, the Torah is very clear that everyone's to follow the law if you come into covenant with him and all of that. But I was just so happy, like Rabbi Berkson was, just to have my eyes finally opened and me to finally understand what I felt like Yahweh had been teaching me since I was a child, that I didn't even think anything about it. I just stepped right into it. But then I began to slowly see that this argument that was going on in Romans was going on in that congregation. And it was constantly, the Jewish people were sent up to do aliyah to the Torah. They were put in leadership positions. That all of the ones who were Gentile born were the ones who were doing all of the service stuff. We were to do the children's things. We were to do the oneg things. We were always to do the other stuff. It was very much a separation. And I didn't even notice it because I was just so happy to see what was happening that I finally had my eyes open. I was following the feasts and all of that. And it wasn't until about 2 years into going to this congregation that I finally was like, I really need to understand a little bit more about what it was. And they gave me a book, and I read it, and my eyes were completely opened. I almost walked away completely from the way because of it. I was like, I am not a second-class citizen. My heart has always been to go in the way of Yahweh, even since I was a child.
Amen.
And so to finally come to a congregation, when I came here, I was like, oh my goodness. They believe everything the same thing that I had always believed to begin with. And so I really appreciate this Beth Shalom, the organization that you've put together, because you're finally starting to open people's eyes. I think that you, Rabbi, are being an instrument to open a lot of people's eyes to the fact that we're all one together, and I really appreciate that. But that's all I have to say. Amen.
I appreciate that. Look, I've always, understood one of my roles was to open their eyes open. I'm sorry. I couldn't resist that. That's the song Brianna wrote. Okay. Look, I want to give you two quick stories that kind of fit into that. One is that when I was relatively new, I guess, to believing in Messiah, and married, my wife and I were in New York, and we went with my mother to the Jewish services. I don't remember what it was for, but it was on Shabbat. We went to Jewish service because it wasn't a Messianic place to go to. So we went to the Jewish service because my mother invited us to go. I said, well, why not? There's certainly nothing. They won't break. You're not sinning to go to a Jewish service, by the way, on Saturday. They're doing, a Torah service. That's what they're supposed to be doing. That's where almost all of the early stuff is going on in Jewish synagogues. And one of the guys saw me there who knew me in the temple, part of the synagogue, and asked if I wanted an aliyah. An aliyah would be to go up onto the bima and to stand when they took out the Torah or whatever it was. And my mother interrupted and said, you can't do that. I go, what do you mean I can't do that? She goes, we're not Jewish anymore. And I looked at her like, what planet are you from? What do you mean I'm not Jewish anymore? Oh, but I believe, she was like, because they don't know you believe in Jesus now or whatever, so the way she would look at it. I was like, so what does that have to do with anything? Okay, they're asking me to give me an opportunity, a blessing to go up. So they wouldn't let me do that. Well, she wouldn't let me do that because she was like, she thought I was being deceptive or something. I was like, I didn't ask to do it. They came up and asked me. And that's very sad. It's also very sad when my wife lost her mother, and the rabbi of that congregation was being very nice to my wife up to that point, and even offered to go with her to sit Shiva down in Florida, et cetera, only eventually to find out that my wife wasn't born Jewish necessarily, which actually I think she probably was. We've done some research on the last name, and it seems to have come up on Holocaust lists, et cetera. But, as soon as she thought that my wife wasn't actually Jewish, she ignored her and treated her like a leper after that. This is not how we should be treating people. Previous to that, she'd been very friendly, very sweet, offered to help and be with her in the hard time of losing her mother. This is how we treat people. This is where a Jew is now acting like a Gentile, so to speak, like a worldly person. And their circumcision has availed nothing. And their hearts wax cold. Because this is that second-class citizen thing. Oh, you're not with us. I'm not doing that for you. Okay? I had the same discussion with an Orthodox Jewish person in Publix the other day. Somebody that used to go to our congregation found them there, and for whatever reason called me to come talk to them about whatever. And in the conversation, I go to introduce them. I mentioned that my children had gone to Chabad when they were very little, and they looked at me because they were Orthodox and they were from that background. They said, "Is your wife Jewish?" I said, "No." They said, "Well, then how could your children go to Chabad?" I said, "Because they're Jewish." They go, "No, they're not." I said, "Book of Numbers." I said, "It says according to the men." She said, "But our rabbis say it's according to the women, to the mother." I said, "Okay." She said, "And we believe the rabbis are the same as she actually said that. She said, the rabbis, what they say, it's the same as equal to the Torah. So now that the rabbis have changed it to being about the mother, it's not about the father anymore." I said, "Okay, I disagree. I'm sorry, but Bimidbar overrides whatever the rabbi said." Okay? And so our discussion ended there, but, But this is the same problem we had in the synagogue when they looked at her. As my wife, she would be under my covering, whatever my covering is. It wouldn't matter any of the other stuff. But this whole, again, it's the prejudice that's there. We got to just get over this prejudicial stuff. It's killing everybody. Okay, where's the mic? Okay, Shira?
Thank you. I'm one of those who's probably going to go home and listen to this 4 times. Boy, there's a lot here. But I really key into what you were sharing, Christina, because as a former Christian Zionist, I hung out with people who I really saw how, even though many Christians do have an arrogant attitude toward the Jews, you blew it and all that, but there's a whole lot of them now who are setting Jews up on a pedestal because Christianity does not have the power to root us in our identity. And so there are a lot of Christians wandering around. They're not ready to give up Christianity, but, if I could just discover my Hebrew roots. And so they're going to grab hold of the tzitzit of a Jew and put them up here and let them do that to them. Because it's this romantic fantasy that, somehow a Jewish person has a key to maybe help me understand my real identity because the church isn't giving it to me. So we've got a lot of people to really pray for who are out there as Christians and can be victimized by that superior attitude. I ran into it in the Boston area at the time that I was really interested in my Hebraic roots. It was all the Jewish people who were in authority that I talked to were pretty much really nice to me, but it's like, you don't have to do this. You don't have to follow Torah.
Right.
And so Abba gave me this revelation. As a Christian, I was being robbed of my identity. and we're looking for that identity. So I really appreciate you brought up the search for, what our true identity is.
Discovering your identity, yeah.
Fabulous teaching.
Yeah.
I also was wondering, just as we're talking, and I'm hearing your tears for Bets and Julie and feeling that. I was wondering, I couldn't find it. I was flipping through and couldn't find it, but I believe in one of the major prophets, it talks about how Yeshua is going to set things right at the end, and Israel will no longer vex Ephraim, and Ephraim will no longer,
Yep.
I don't know where that is, but that was a wonderful hope that came to my mind.
Awesome. Amen. And by the way, and bring the mic over. I don't know, Mandy's got his hand up. He's been wanting to get over. Let's try and get to him, and then we'll go to Rabbi Tom after that. Let me just say this, and maybe I'm wrong here, and maybe I'm just splitting hairs, but I hear this phrase a lot, and it bothers me, okay? And the phrase is, I'm looking for the Hebrew roots of Christianity. Christianity does not have Hebrew roots, okay? MTOI does, and Messianic Torah Observant Israel does, okay? But Christianity has pagan roots, okay? The only thing that it acknowledges that's Hebrew at all is the fact that it's forced to recognize a birthright lineage that leads to Yeshua. Otherwise, they would be very happy to disconnect completely. Okay, so they're not looking for their Hebrew roots. They want to look for the roots of Christianity, go look in paganism. Because that's what Christianity is. It's taking the thing that was Hebraic and started with Jews and turned it into the mess it is today, was the roots through paganism. And I think that, so, I mean, literally, if you're looking at a family tree, there are roots that go back into the Hebraic thing, and there's physical lineage there. But the roots of Christianity, the system, is purely pagan. The early church fathers brought it into that mess and invented this thing called Christianity. Okay, the early believers were not Christians. That's something that was brought in later. They were Torah-observant Jews that believed in Messiah Yeshua and only thought of themselves as Jews who happened to believe in Messiah Yeshua more fully. And so that's this new system that was invented came much later. Actually, sadly, not too much later, but later enough. Okay, Candace.
Well, I think about people in the Tanakh like Ruth and Rahab, and how do you explain them away? I mean, they're counted in the genealogy. Yeah. King David is an ancestor, is related to Ruth, and I mean, she was a Gentile. And what about Queen Esther? Surely, she was married to a heathen king. She was still counted a Jew. And I'm sure they had children, but they're not mentioned. So how is it that they can the Jews
They don't explain it. Well, first of all, they explain that that's why the lineage of Messiah is flawed, so he can't be Messiah. Okay, because they'll say because of Ruth being in the lineage. Okay? Of course, that also destroys David. As being of any, I'm just saying that they can't explain these things, but doing what? The same thing the Jews and the Gentiles. Look, this is something Jew and Gentile has in common. Spinning the word to their own destruction. Okay? And that's what they do.
Yeah, and even when they're counting the mothers as, your mother's not Jewish, so you can't be Jewish. And yet there's Queen Esther who married a heathen king. I'm sure they had children, but you never hear about those children.
No, well, the Bible's only going to tell you about the children or the people that are furthering the story. There's millions and millions and billions of people that existed in the world over those years that never get mentioned unless they were a part of interacting with the key people in the stories. So we don't really get to hear about them. But just realize that the reason that they went with the mothers was because during the Middle Ages and times after Yeshua, there was so much going on with all the wars that they didn't always know who the father was. And so the more likelihood they would know who the mother was how they did the lineage. And that was a rabbinic decision during a time when very often you would not know because of all the raping and the pillaging and all the other stuff going on, that you wouldn't often know who the father was. And so there was a functional reasoning at the time, but that should not override and negate when you actually know who the father is. Okay? If you know who the Father is, then you know. And that's according to the book of Numbers, as all of the lineages are according to their father's houses. Okay?
First off, I want to just reiterate what Berkson said, because if Rabbi can accept a broken California guy who's in the music industry for 15 years with tattoos and piercings, with heavy metal background, like he can, everybody's welcome. Everybody's welcome. So thank you for that. Appreciate that.
You have piercings and tattoos? Now you tell me.
But I did have a question with the second-class citizen talk that we were all talking about earlier. How does Matthew 15:22 fit in some way? If you can look that up real quick. I was just curious about that story. That's what I was remembering.
Yeah, it does to a little degree. This is the story of the woman, and she cries out. She's from Canaan, and she cries out and says, "Have compassion on me, O Master, Son of David. My daughter is badly demon-possessed." He didn't answer a word, and then the tall one said, "Send her away," before she cries after us. And he says, "I was not sent except for the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But then she came and bowing to him said, "Master, help me." And he answered, saying, "It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." But she said, "Yea, Master, for even the dogs eat the crumbs," is what Berkson was talking about, "which fall from their master's table." And Yeshua said, "Ah, woman, your belief is great. Let it be to you as you desire." Okay, so he's showing that, you can't just be impressed with something. You have to show you want it. You have to demonstrate that you want it. Look, I hate to use this as, maybe this is a terrible example, maybe it's a great example, but a lot of you have seen back, especially if you're my age, back in the old days, the really bad karate movies where the lip syncing was all bad and everything else. But they always made the students do dumb things to prove they were actually serious before they teach them anything. Right? Even the Karate Kid movie did that a little bit. In other words, he wasn't just going to do for her. He wanted the people to hear her say, "I know what I am." Now, by referring to her as a dog there, I don't think she was Gentile. I think she was an Israelite that had assimilated, and that was being looked down on as the dogs, okay? And he was saying, look, even the dogs get to eat the crumbs. She's just like, "I don't care what you think I am. I know I am whatever I am. I deserve all that. I'm coming to you and recognizing who you are." And then he said, "Oh, your belief is great." Because she had the humbleness to accept who she is. Say, "Hey, I own what I am. My lineage and my decisions to assimilate and do the things we've done. And now I'm looking to come back the other way. I'm recognizing you, Messiah, as Messiah." Okay? So that's why he ignored her at first. He wanted the people with him, especially his disciples, to see her. He already knew, but to see her out loud demonstrate the level of faith. Amen? Okay, to show that she wanted it that bad. Okay, where's the mic? Okay, Rabbi Tom?
Thank you, Rabbi. I just wish that some of the people who want to convert to full-blown Judaism could hear and understand some of the things that were discussed and taught here today. Yeah. I knew a couple in Ohio. They were both professors at a university I went to. And years ago, they'd adopted a young boy. They got him when he was less than 2 years old. And he was raised as a Jew. These professors are both Jewish. And he grew up reading and writing Hebrew. He made several trips to Israel, and he loved Judaism. He loved to go to the shul. He went there every week faithfully. He went to all the, what they call holidays, we call Moedim. And he was really into Judaism. But his mother told me that in order to be considered a Jew, he would have to undergo conversion. And even after conversion, there would be certain things he would not be able to do. She said he would be able to light, for example, the Hanukkah candles, but not say the blessings, because the blessings belong to the Jews. And he was not a Jew, even though he would be converted. And yet we have people, we have Hollywood personalities and political personalities who are ethnic Jews, and they could not give three hoots or a holler about any kind of religion. They're totally irreligious, and they'll say, unless they're Messianic, of course, and then, he's a Jew. They said Trotsky was a Jew, although he was a communist atheist, and they said certain Hollywood personalities are Jewish, which they were, and yet someone who wants to be a Jew by choice cannot be a Jew. It's a very unfair system.
Well,
I wish people...
It goes back to this. Nothing's changed.
Exactly. I wish people who want to convert would convert to common sense.
Amen. Look, and it goes in different layers too, by the way, because I know some of you were a denomination that didn't think very highly of a different denomination or knew different, like if you were Baptist, maybe you had an issue with the Charismatics or the Methodists or the Lutheran, different groups, even though you're all in that same bigger thing, right? Look, I tell my wife to hold her ears. So before I met my wife, but many, many years before that, I was actually interested in an Orthodox Jewish girl back in college. It didn't go very far because her family, being Orthodox, and I was not, this was before I had any interest in Messiah, okay? But her family being Orthodox and my not being Orthodox and being totally Torah observant and everything else, I was at her house one time, and her parents, her mother, I think, came in the house, and we were sitting in the living room just talking, and her mother walked in, and actually, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but it's an interesting thing to be physically ignored. I said, hello, she never looked at me. She just literally acted like I wasn't in the room. She walked up to her daughter and said something. I tried to be polite. She literally ignored me because I was a Gentile in her eyes, okay? So even within the groups, you have these kind of problems, okay? So if you go, as a conservative Jew or a Reformed Jew, if you go to the Chabad or the Orthodox, they're gonna try to convert you to their thing because you're really not a Jew until you become their thing. And so this whole hierarchy and stuff is a bunch of malarkey. It's nonsense, okay? I don't know, I said hierarchy, I thought of malarkey, I don't know why. Okay, so it rhymed. But the thing is, it's nonsense, okay? Paul says it clearly. If what you do is what Gentiles do, it doesn't matter what you were born. If what you do is what covenanted people do, then you're covenanted. You are based on what you do, and you do based on what you believe. Come on, you guys should have known this already, okay? Okay? And so that's really where we're at. And by the way, I don't know how we're going to tie this together, but I don't think anybody's going to follow this whole teaching without listening to the full Afterburn to understand what I just taught. So they're going to have a high recommendation. Go listen to the Afterburn to make sure you understand what just was done for that hour. Okay? All right, where's the mic? Okay, Dawn?
I think you may have answered my question.
I did. Okay, next question.
Just to clarify.
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Actually, I think it was Michelle that said something, but I wrote it down when we were going through it. So there's only one covenant. There's not the Jews, or the issue was between the Jews and the non-Jews. But then in Revelation, it talks about the 12 gates, and you have to enter through the 12 gates. So that almost seems like a divisional issue where you break it down. You have to be part of the gates. But then I thought, the 12 gates are the 12 tribes and back to Israel. So I think it just brought me all the way back.
I love it when you answer your own questions. Okay, next question. I don't know, there was nothing for me to add. She just answered her own question beautifully. All right? Don't get confused when we're talking about the Jews, because Paul's talking about the Jews, because the rest of Israel's not around for this conversation. We do get to the whole Israel discussion when we get to Romans 11, okay? And we get that more clear. But he's dealing with the visible part of Israel at the time. But yet when we get to Revelation, you have a fully restored Israel, and we have the names of the 12 tribes on the 12 gates, all right? And so you have that. Look, even when they were a cohesive nation, they were still broken up into their tribes, Okay, so it's not a divisional thing, it's a functional thing. Okay, it's the way the family was set up and divided out. And so, do I understand that completely? Probably not. Probably none of us do, but we'll have to understand when Yahweh explains it all. So there's no surprise that we have 12 gates for the 12 tribes. But I think the main thing to recognize is that there's no gate that says Gentile on it. Okay? All right, and I don't think you're going to get in trouble if you walk through the wrong gate either. And it's just the point is, it's for the 12 tribes. All right? Okay. Live stream. Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, from Olivia and Janet Hoffman. Rabbi, chapter 1, verses 29 through 32. I can say I am and have been guilty of some of these, and I deserve death. Have been working to sin less and less. How do I work on the one area where I keep stumbling?
Start to recognize that you keep doing it because you like it. You sicko. That was from a different teaching. Okay. That was an in focus. It came from a teaching though. Okay. You got to recognize that there's still some aspect of that thing. Well, I'll look at the camera, I guess. Okay. You got to recognize that there's some aspect of that thing that you like. Okay. There's some part of it that you're drawn to because you get some, whether it's a perverse or literal joy or pleasure out of it, it makes you feel justified, right, or whatever it is. Maybe like if it's something like a whisperer or whatever it is, or unforgiving, whatever, somehow you feel good and justified in doing that thing. So you want to change it, you got to change the way you feel about it. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Okay.
From Beyond Ready. Is it correct understanding that in order to be judged by Yah, one needs to first have Torah revealed to them?
Yeah, the judging really doesn't come to play until you're in covenant. Okay, you have to be judged. You're going to be judged according to the law. Now, you're not going to be judged according to the law if you didn't know there was a law. Okay, so that's where you need to listen to the Millennium and Kingdom teaching, which explains how that works for everybody and why everybody will get their chance and all that kind of stuff. All right. And let me go back to Janet's first question, though, which was, I just want to say this again so I'm really, really clear about it. Stop fighting the reality. You struggle with stuff you like. You might hate the fact that you like it, but you like it, or you wouldn't do it. If you really didn't like it and didn't really want to do it, you wouldn't do it. You do it because you want to. And you got to figure out why. I just didn't feel like I don't know. I just didn't feel like I hit that hard enough. Okay? You are doing this because you have some thing that you're getting out of it. Some pleasure, something. You feel justified, you feel better about yourself, you feel whatever it is. Okay? They deserve it, they this. I don't know what it is, but there's something in you that gets something out of it. And until you figure that out, you're not fixing it. Okay, next question.
From Dan Adams. So say I am keeping Torah, and if I have children and raise them in this, are they considered natural born or grafted in of Israel?
All right. I don't want to pick on you, but you completely missed everything. Stop thinking about that stuff. Okay? It matters nothing. Okay? I'm sorry. I'm going to be a little upset with that. Okay? You're not listening. He's trying to make the point that it doesn't matter what you were born, so stop worrying about which one is which. Make your choice to do what you're supposed to do, to covenant, and it won't matter which was which. Nowhere along the line is it going to be like, well, you know, you're all messed up because you never figured out that you were actually born in, or you didn't figure out that you weren't. No, you're going to be judged according to what you chose to do. Okay, so let's not miss that point. Stop trying to worry about your DNA swab and which tribe you think you came from, and oh, you had a dream that you're Zebulon or something, okay? That's all irrelevant. Walk this out. Do what you're supposed to do and you'll be where you're supposed to be. That's what he's always told me to tell you guys. If you're doing what you're supposed to do, the way you're supposed to do it, with the right attitude, the right spirit, the right belief, you'll be where you're supposed to be. No matter what you were born, what your parents did, go to Ezekiel 18, read about, well, your father was a great guy, but you were a lousy guy. Well, guess what? His right, being a great guy, doesn't help you at all. Well, no, your father was a lousy sinner, but you're a great guy. Well, his sin doesn't hurt you either. It's all about you own what you do. You don't understand what I'm talking about? I just paraphrase Ezekiel 18. Go back and read it. Okay? But that's what we need to understand, and we have to own that. Okay, so I'm not trying to pick on Dan, or I forget who said it. Okay? Okay, but please, don't miss the point. Don't worry about what your children are born or not born. Worry about what you're showing them in your walk and teaching them in your house and giving them every opportunity to be ready when Abba opens their eyes. And by the way, it's clear in the scripture here, everything that we're reading, that just because you were born in doesn't mean your eyes are open. Doesn't mean your ears are open. You have to have a revelation. I'm not talking like Christianese, I got a revelation. I mean, he has to reveal himself to you in some way where he opens your eyes and ears and you go, oh, I get it now. I can see it now. I can receive that. I understand. He has to reveal himself to you. Not in a vision or a dream, just in opening up your eyes. And you'll sit and listen to a sermon, and all of a sudden, you're receiving it different. Or you're reading your scriptures, and all of a sudden you see something you never saw before as he starts to reveal himself to you.
From Aaron
everybody should be afraid not to ask the question after I just blasted up. And I apologize. I didn't mean, actually, I'm glad you asked the question because now people can hear that, because I know there are other people that are doing the same thing. Don't get caught up in that. Go ahead, next question.
From Aaron Sullivan, because of the way Paul uses the word circumcision, would the correct way to read Galatians 2:3 be that Titus was not compelled to convert to Judaism? So this is generally used by Christians to prove that circumcision of the flesh is no longer required.
I don't spend a whole lot of time in Galatians, but let me just go there now. Galatians 2:3. I mean, that sounds like a plausible response here. Yes, I would say that's probably a reasonable guess there. Okay, that to be consistent, it was the idea of trying to get him to become a Jew, to go over the bridge into Judaism. Okay? Because let's remember, part of the context is we have to understand what Paul can't be saying. Okay? He cannot ever teach against circumcision. So if it looks like he is, either A, Paul really is a problem, or B, he's talking about something else. Okay? So you're going to have to figure out which way it goes. Next question.
All right, from the McTigrit family, in Romans 3:21, I understand that Christianity teaches that there is a righteousness separate from Torah obedience, but what is it really saying what it is really saying is that belief in Yeshua plus Torah brings righteousness?
I think I explained that a lot. You just go back and listen to the teaching. If that didn't do it for you, then you can call me or something. Because I think I explained that pretty thoroughly as I went over and over in that thing. You know, you're dealing with the idea here. Which verse was that numbered? Okay, verse 21. Okay, now apart from the Torah, righteousness of Elohim has been revealed, being witnessed by the Torah and the prophets, etc. So they're pointing to, this is the same problem, like I said it again, that it was in Hebrews. Okay, you're having a bunch of Jews here that are also having to understand that there's something that's being revealed that even though it's hinted at and talked about in the Torah, it's witnessed by, it's revealed, being witnessed by the Torah and the prophets, it's a righteousness that's separate from. Why? Because all have fallen short, all have sinned, all are worthy of death. And he talks about that in other places. So we need this other level of righteousness to pay that ultimate price. And he's trying to explain that to them. This is a hard sell. This is a hard thing for a Jew to understand, because they feel like they've got everything they need in the Torah. But they also don't understand the idea of their righteousness being like filthy rags in an ultimate sense. There's a value only up to a point. Because even the filthy rag had a value. It was useful as a filthy rag up to a point. Then it became of no more use. At some point, you need his righteousness to be imbued and be applied to you. But the hard part for everybody is, when does that happen? I don't think it happens until the end. When you've done all, and having done all, stand, as Paul would say, and then we get to have that righteousness applied to us so that we can get in. Otherwise, you have stained garments, not pure white garments. When you're dressed all in white, as it says in Revelation. The bride's made herself ready, and with the application of Yeshua, we can be unstained and unblemished. Because even when you repent, the stain's still there. You're clean, but stained. Just like a filthy rag. The filthy rag doesn't necessarily mean it's not clean. It could be just all stained with all the things you wiped up and cleaned up with the rag. No matter how much times you wash it, it's not getting clean again. In terms of white and unstained. And so what do? Yeshua is the only way that it can bleach all that out, so to speak. It actually gives you that total cleansed purity again when his righteousness gets applied to you. But you don't qualify for that until you do all your stuff. See, Christianity wants to make you think everybody who believes believes in Messiah gets that automatically applied to them, and they're all qualified for that. Just because in their brilliance they made an altar call. Like that should be the big, wow. You got out of a chair and you went up and made a call. Well, it took a lot maybe to get out of the chair. I give some people credit who were shy or whatever. But so what? Did it change your life? Most people no. Not really. Maybe in some small ways for short periods of time. If you did change your life, it wasn't because you got out of the chair that one time. It's because something else changed you. Something else lit up in your head and in your heart and woke you up. Otherwise, we're going to attribute magic to the altar call. We don't believe in magic. So let's knock that off. Okay, Rob, go ahead.
Okay, from Leanne, question. I've heard Rabbi say that there's no Gentile believers, yet Paul in Romans is addressing Gentile believers, is he not? Is that a translation problem?
No. He's trying to talk to the Gentiles that believe, and eventually he's going to get them to chapter 11 where he tells them they're all Israel. Okay, up to this point, he's talking to the two groups as two groups. He's going to get them back together in chapter 11 when he talks about being grafted into that tree. Okay? And so we'll get there when we get to Romans 11. You can only imagine how long that's going to take. We got 3 chapters done today. So who knows? And some of the chapters coming up are even more convoluted than what we just did. Okay? But in the meantime, understand that in addressing the people, he's addressing them from their perspective. You as a Gentile, from where you came from. Remember, everything he's addressing is based on what? How they were born. Not their current status. Are we clear? He's not addressing status today. He's addressing status at their birth when he's referring to those circumcision and those of the uncircumcision. Those are the Gentiles, those are the Jews. He's only talking about their birth, which way they were born. Okay, when I say there's no such thing as a Gentile believer, we're talking about after you've been born and now you've made choices, you've now changed your citizenship, that you should no longer call yourself a Gentile. You're now an Israelite. Okay, so Paul isn't contradicting that at all, and he's talking to each group so they know which one he's talking to. So he's addressing them based on their birth. Okay, next question.
I believe that's all. That just pertains to today's teaching. I'm just trying to answer some questions on here.
All right, well, I'm glad. Praise Yah, my voice made it through to the end here. There were a couple of moments towards the beginning where it felt like it was going to go on me, but it made it through. I appreciate that. All right, so let's go ahead and get the children in here.